On today's show, we check in on the players selected between 11th and 20th overall in the 2024 NHL Draft, highlighted by Zeev Buium of the Minnesota Wild.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this show, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. I'm your host, Sebastian High, the USHL scout over at Elite Prospects. And on today's show, we're going to be diving in to the 2024 and 2025 seasons of the players selected between 11th and 20th overall in the 2024 NHL Draft. In the first segment, we'll be breaking down Sam Dickinson of the San Jose Sharks, Zeev Buium of the Minnesota Wild, and Jett Luchanko of the Philadelphia Flyers. Then in the second segment, we'll be looking at 4 players: Konsta Helenius of the Buffalo Sabres, then Michael Brandsegg Nygard of the Detroit Red Wings, Adam Jiricek, a St. Louis Blues draft pick, as well as Terik Parascak, who was picked up by the Washington Capitals. And in the final segment, in the third, we're going to be wrapping up the show talking about Sacha Boisvert, picked by the Chicago Blackhawks, Trevor Connelly of the Vegas Golden Knights, and last but certainly not least, Cole Eiserman of the New York Islanders. So 10 very notable prospects that had varying seasons in their draft year campaigns and have all followed those up with pretty interesting D+1 seasons. Some have been dominant, some less so, but overall still pretty good progression on most fronts for these 10 players. So let's dive straight into the episode here in the first segment, kicking it off with Sam Dickinson, the 11th overall selection at the draft of the San Jose Sharks, a player most people didn't expect to be available past 10th overall. I knew a lot of the scouts that I was standing around, public scouts in this case, Brock Otten and Derek Neumeier of McKeen's Hockey, who are massive Sam Dickinson fans, became increasingly anxious as the evening unfolded and Sam Dickinson slipped down the board in just anticipation of a team getting an absolute steal in their eyes when he does get picked. And for them, the San Jose Sharks did just that. And I mean, a season this year with the London Knights in the OHL where Sam Dickinson has scored 22 goals in 44 games, 69 points across that span, well above a point a game pace as a 6'3", 209-pound left shot defenseman who skates like the wind, was young for his draft class. He's only turning 19 in June of this year. And on top of that, has just this incredibly pro-ready frame in terms of pure strength and power. This guy is polished for sure. But the mental polish has always been the bit of a question mark with this player in terms of projecting him to the NHL, because it's not that he's not intelligent, but the decision-making under pressure definitely faltered at times last year. Still been a case throughout this campaign, and I know that some people who watch the OHL a lot still have their doubts with this player in terms of translating effectively to the National Hockey League level at that pace, to making quick decisions under pressure at that level on both sides of the puck. But from my personal perspective, I think that Dickinson has the physical profile to make that transition a lot easier to the NHL. Of course, it's a game where the mental pace is of the utmost importance, but he's taken some strides in that regard in my eyes this season with the London Knights in the OHL, and that's been evident not only offensively, where he's really blossomed into becoming one of London's top offensive creators. He's really been a difference-making factor for this team night in, night out, and it's one of the best teams in the entire CHL. He sits second on team points behind only Denver Barkey. He's ahead of guys like Sam O'Reilly, who also played 10 more games than Dickinson has. And yet Dickinson still has about 15, 16 point lead on him at the moment. And O'Reilly was also a first-round selection by the Edmonton Oilers in the last draft. So Dickinson's been really exploring his offensive game, but not at the detriment of the defensive decision-making too much. His mobility in terms of crushing things up in against the rush and just neutralizing opponents outright is one of the better ones outside the NHL, in my view, in terms of just potential to work with, and the upside that can be gained from this player, and just smashing players off the rush and taking them completely out of the play, and also doing so without taking himself out of the play too often. He has the feet to recover, and he's becoming also a bit more cautious in terms of committing his body weight to not take himself out of his defensive assignment and his defensive position. That said, I think that Dickinson's really progressed this season. Sharks fans should be very excited and happy with this player. But moving on, at 12th overall, we have Zeev Buium of the Minnesota Wild, who traded up one slot with the Philadelphia Flyers to secure this selection. And Buium is the kind of play that you trade up for in the first half of the first round. And he is not disappointed whatsoever this season. 35 points in 29 games from the blue line at the University of Denver. One of the best college programs this season, and Buium's been truly like the gear taking the rest. Nothing would work half as seamlessly as it does in Denver without Zeev Buium. He's a really integral cog in their wheel. But as a 6 foot, 185-pound left shot defenseman, he doesn't have the same physical capabilities as Sam Dickinson. But this season, with Denver, he's shown night in, night out that he can play almost half a game of hockey every single time. He hasn't played a game with less than 23.55 in the last 10. He's played upwards of 34 minutes at one point as well in a game against the University of North Dakota, which they lost 3-1, and also a game in which he logged 12 penalty minutes. How that combines with 34 minutes on ice and in a regulation game, this guy is getting triple shifted, and it's easy to see why. He's consistently making good decisions in the defensive zone. He's a responsible player, always scanning, head on a swivel, has that agility to escape pressure in tight, doesn't have that explosiveness to really gain separation all that much as a skater, but is really mobile in all four directions. But in the offensive zone, this isn't the guy that's going to activate constantly and try to create things a la Lane Hudson. He's much more of a point creator and circulator and connector. He's the fulcrum in the offensive zone rather than the spark that opens gaps up and opens up seams that to be exploited both for the player himself and for teammates. That's less of Zeev Buium's game in terms of those incessant activations, but still significant offensive potential. But what I think Minnesota Wild fans in particular are going to really appreciate is that, similarly to a player like Brock Faber, Buium does not sacrifice defense in order to create the offense. The defensive game is so solid. The decision-making is polished. Those two on a pairing, I think, would be something to enjoy for Wild fans for a very, very long time. But to wrap up this first segment, let's talk about Jett Luchanko, the 13th overall pick of the Philadelphia Flyers, the 5'11", 190-pound right shot centerman playing with the Guelph Storm in the OHL, has logged 19 goals and 48 points in 34 games this season. Pretty big jump in terms of point per game compared to last year where he had 74 and 68. And he was also oddly utilized at the World Juniors like every other player seemingly on the roster was. So he didn't really log many points there with a single goal across 5 games. But Luchanko has been really on a roll recently, scoring 6 goals and 17 points in his last 10. 4 goals and 9 points in his last 5. He's gaining some steam in Guelph offensively, but this is a player that I think every Flyers fan already knows what to appreciate with how he plays, with what he's already shown in the NHL. He's really quick. He works hard every single shift, defensively solid. There's transition upside there, and he's a really deft and intelligent passer of the puck. This isn't a player that I think has slam dunk like top six upside, but as a middle six play connecting, pacey centerman who can win you faceoffs and glue lines together, this is an important piece to build around, and a kind of player that every single team making deep runs in the playoffs needs at least one or two of in their lineup, and this is one of them. So while he's not the flashiest offensively, and there were more offensive options left on the board when the Flyers picked Luchanko, there's a reason they went with this player, and he's been delivering on those facets this season. But that wraps up this first segment. In the next one, we're going to be breaking down Konsta Helenius, Michael Brandsegg Nygard, Adam Jiricek, and Terik Parascak. But first, a quick message from our sponsors. If you're like me, your mornings have to start with a good cup of coffee. But I got tired of settling for grocery store brands that just weren't cutting it. That's why I turned to Trade. And let me tell you, this coffee is next level. Trade is the #1 specialty coffee marketplace in the United States, bringing you fresh coffee from over 50 of the country's top roasters. Their experts have taste tested thousands of coffees, curating over 450 amazing roasts. Whether you're new to coffee or know exactly what you like, they'll handpick the perfect match for you. I took their quick quiz, and in under a minute, they matched me with a roast that was fresh, smelled incredible, and tasted even better. It's become my go-to every single morning. Right now, Trade is exclusively offering our listeners 40% off your first order at drinktrade.com/lockedonnhl. That's drinktrade, TRADE.com/lockedonnhl for 40% off your first order. All right, let's keep this episode rolling in the second segment, starting it off with Konsta Helenius of the Buffalo Sabres, an intelligent two-way center that put up a bunch of points in Liga in his draft year campaign, 36 in 51 games with Jiricek, and this season he's continued playing professional hockey, but in a different setting this time around in the AHL with the Rochester Americans, where he's played in 46 games and scored 8 goals and 24 points overall. He had a 3-point game last Friday, and is exploring the playmaking a little bit more this season, but is mainly just settling in and adapting to the pace of the North American game and doing a pretty good job at doing so, while still being a responsible impact on the defensive side. And in terms of offense, he hasn't been necessarily dissecting defenses all on his own. You haven't been seeing Helenius on solo rushes or doing like these tremendously dynamic plays in the offensive zone, but that's never been his primary game. What he does best is connect play, glue things together, and be responsible defensively. And I think on those fronts, he's definitely already delivering for the most part in that kind of role with the Rochester Americans. Hopefully next season he'll be able to step into a true top line capacity on that team and take on some more offensive responsibilities. But for the time being, it's been a good first North American campaign for Konsta Helenius. Next, we have Michael Brandsegg Nygard of the Detroit Red Wings, who's transferred over to the SHL this season to play with Skellefteå AIK, where he scored 11 points, including 5 goals in 37 games this season. He's playing primarily fourth-line minutes. He's playing exclusively in that bottom six, so the lack of offensive production shouldn't be shocking, but he's still his very, very unique brand of player in terms of high motor down the wing, physicality, goal scoring threat with a really heavy release, also in motion and from distance, but hasn't really been going in against SHL netminders this season. But defensively, the effort, the intelligence, the physical pressure, the stick work, all of these things are already quite refined in his game. And he's playing a very effective bottom six role in the SHL. One thing to note is penalty minutes have absolutely skyrocketed this season. Last year, he had 19 in 41 games. This year, he has 49 in 37 games. So he's taking more penalties for sure, playing a more physical brand of hockey. That's been evident in my viewings as well. And overall, he's looked pretty decent so far this year. After maybe the first 5-7 games were a slow acclimatization process to the SHL pace, because it's definitely a jump. But still, it's been a good season for Brandsegg Nygard. Even though the production hasn't been leaping off the page, it's not something I would really worry about if I were a Red Wings fan, because the main draw with this player was never the production to begin with, but I also think that the production will grow there with time if he's surrounded by skill in a middle six capacity at the next level. Next, we have Adam Jiricek, picked by the St. Louis Blues at 16th overall, who's been playing with the Brantford Bulldogs in the OHL this season. He's played 20 games. In those, he's scored 3 goals and 10 points. It's nice to see him actually just playing games of hockey again. He missed some time this season for sure as well. But ever since January and coming back from the World Junior Championships, he's been staying healthy, and it's been a ridiculously good run for Brantford on that stretch. Since the World Juniors, they've only lost 2 games in that entire stretch of games. And in there, while Jiricek's points haven't been jumping off the board, what he has been doing has been bringing physicality and a lot of defensive aggression to the table, which is what I've been wanting to see with this player as well. In his draft year, the defensive game was a real point of question, I would say. And even though the aggression was always there, the decision making supporting it was a real question mark in my eyes. But this season, it's definitely gotten a little bit better. I'd love to see him just explore the offense a little bit more too, as we've seen him be able to do internationally at the U18 level. But that's going back to his D-1 season, mainly the Hlinka Gretzky of his draft year at the very beginning of it. So it's been a while since we've been seeing that side of Jiricek, but I'd love to see him go a bit more in that direction, maybe next season, once he has a little bit more consistency and health, hopefully, on his side. But now to wrap up this segment, we're going to focus on a Washington Capitals draft pick. At 17th overall, they selected Terik Parascak of the Prince George Cougars in the WHL. Parascak's a high IQ forward who scored 43 goals and 105 points in 68 games last season, which got him drafted this high up. And it wasn't really where he's projected to go, mainly because his skating is subpar, but that high level of intelligence made Hadi Kalakesh, my former co-host here on the podcast, a massive fan of him for his entire draft year. He's a really clinical and opportunistic goal scorer, but it's that connective play, the playmaking, the 2-zone passes through multiple sticks. These are the elements that made him really special, but the off-puck movement in the offensive zone, what really could set him apart at the professional level, that's the element that I see as most projectable in his game, and he's continued to really show that that's a massive element of his profile this season with the Prince George Cougars. And I mean, 25 goals, 73 points in 54 games this season hasn't been half bad. He's been continuously pushing the pace off the rush. He's going for a lot more give and goes, which I've been really liking to see, keeping his distance to the puck a little bit closer in more supportive positions, rather than perhaps seeking the perfect off puck route to the back post for the easy tap and goal. He's been a bit more pragmatic, perhaps, in his supportive off puck habits and sticking closer to the puck carrier rather than trying to ask for a high danger pass to the back post, being a little bit closer, going for give and goes in those connective plays, which I've really liked to see in his game this season and should make the jump to pro hockey that much easier once he does make it. But yeah, it's been a really good season here for Terik Parascak. But that wraps up the second segment. In the final one, we're going to wrap up the show with Sacha Boisvert of the Chicago Blackhawks, Trevor Connelly of the Vegas Golden Knights, and Cole Eiserman of the New York Islanders. But first, a quick message from our sponsors. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for an even bigger payout, you can combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game extremely exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch 3, I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. All righty, let's wrap up the show here in the final segment, kicking it off with another Chicago Blackhawks prospect. We've been talking about them a lot. Yesterday's episode was almost entirely dedicated to Blackhawks in the Ringside Roundup with the top performing prospects of the week. But today we're talking about Sacha Boisvert, who's been playing with the University of North Dakota in the NCAA. He's a 6'2", 183-pound left shot center who plays a physical, rugged game. He has a really heavy shot. He's a clinical goal scorer, but his combination of physicality, proactive feet, and aggression makes him a really, really good kind of checking centerman and gives him that kind of heavy center upside for middle six role for the Blackhawks moving forward, which is a profile they were missing in their prospect pool. And he's delivered exactly on those promises this season at UND. 30 games, 12 goals, 23 points. Really good first season. Not quite at a point a game, but he's playing about between 14 and 16 minutes a night most games. So it's a bit more of a second line, sometimes third line capacity. So point per game production shouldn't be the expectation, especially in the freshman campaign. But this is a guy that I think after another year or two of college refinement could be ready for third line NHL minutes because the defensive habits are pretty solid. He has that physicality. He's proven himself as a goal scorer, but also as a gritty off-puck player who can play those dirty shifts, the difficult shifts late in games, protecting leads, getting into those puck battles along the boards, at the net front. He doesn't cower away from any of it. The feet, the skating still needs some work, but as a whole, this is a really exciting player that I think is bang on course to be what the Chicago Blackhawks drafted him to be. Next, we have Trevor Connelly, really pacey, dynamic, creative winger who was drafted by the Vegas Golden Knights at 19th overall, 6'1", 161-pound left shot, left wing, who's played with Providence College in the NCAA this season. Has 4 goals and 12 points in 17 games across that span, but it hasn't been a very strong Providence College team this year. He's a -12 in his minutes. He's mainly playing on the first line, 18, 19 minutes a night, but has struggled in terms of getting support this season. That said, he has been playing some really good hockey as of late in the last month or two. He's been showing a lot more dynamism, being a lot more middle-driven with his rushes, but that support around him is still just a bit lacking. But the stick handling and skating combination is borderline elite. The shot as well, he's able to score from range, and he's a player that could really be part of the next generation of offensive flair in Las Vegas. He's still a bit of a raw player who's going to need some time, still rounding out his defensive game especially, but he has true top six upside potentially as a play driving piece, which is something that you don't always have available to you at 19th overall. And the Vegas Golden Knights snapped him up. I think as he's showing this season, it's still a bit of a work in progress in terms of bringing the offense consistently, but it really should be noted that the lack of support has been a factor this campaign and that he projects as a player with that top six potential if things in his development go to plan, and there's no guarantees they will. But just to kind of illustrate what the offensive situation is looking like in Providence, the highest scoring players have 21 and 20 points respectively. 3 players, Logan Will, Tanner Adams, and Hudson Malinowski. And you can throw John Mustard in there as well, who has 19 points. All of those in 29 or 31 games between all those players. So not a single player is even close to touching the point of game mark for Providence. Offense has just not been the name of the game for this team this year. So I can't entirely blame Trevor Connelly for the somewhat disappointing production for a freshman NCAA campaign, because the situation is certainly a factor. Speaking of NCAA production, we have Cole Eiserman of Boston University, drafted by the New York Islanders at 20th overall this past draft. This player, who broke the US NTDP all-time goal-scoring record, has scored 16 goals and 24 points in 31 games this season with Boston University in a pure goal-scoring role. I mean, 16 goals to 8 assists at the NCAA level definitely illustrates a point. He played 19 minutes in their most recent game against UConn, the University of Connecticut, but beyond that has largely been playing between 12 to 15 minutes a night this season. So falling into that middle six role a little bit when the production hasn't been there. The last 5 games, he hasn't registered a point. The last 10, he's registered 3. So it's been a little bit of a dry spell at the moment, and he's always been a bit more of a streaky player in terms of the production. So this shouldn't come as a shock, but it's been a little bit of a growing pains year, I think, with Eiserman, where he's had some wake-up calls that the intensity is a lot higher at the college level than what he was used to with the NTDP. And also that he's not really among the most dynamic scorers on his team for a season this year, on a team with Cole Hudson and Quinn Hudson leading the charge with 39 and 33 points respectively. Ryan Green, another Chicago draft pick, and the captain of the team, has 28 and 32. Eiserman is second on the team in goals behind only Quinn Hudson. But again, that has always been his specialty, so that should not be a shock. For Islanders fans, this is pretty much the expectation I had for a freshman campaign for Eiserman. I knew that there were going to be goals, and half a goal a game is certainly delivering on goals. But the overall game, the playmaking, the off-puck intensity, the defensive implications, these are all still works in progress. And this is also why he's a player that I believe could use a full ride in college, a full 4 years, maybe just 3 years, but a decent amount of time to just refine, work on the game, and refine, especially defensively, because there's still work to be done, but the potential is so clear, and it's why perhaps there's a level of frustration in my viewings with Eiserman, because the offensive potential is so glaringly obvious. The goal scoring, the shooting ability are off the charts good. And he could be a top 6, like 40 goal guy if he really hits and pans out for the Islanders. But he could also be another Oliver Wahlstrom type. And I mean, Wahlstrom was just placed on waivers again. So I think that's also a possibility with Eiserman. But a freshman campaign where he's up to 24 points and 16 goals in 31 games shouldn't be scoffed at. That's pretty good production for a middle 6 role overall this season. Obviously playing on the first power play most of the time, but still, it's been an okay season for Cole Eiserman, I guess. Could have been more exciting than it's been, but he's taken some steps, but still has others that he needs to take in order to truly hit and become the player that both Islanders and hockey fans in general want him to become. But that wraps up the show for us here today. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please do make us your first listen of the day. We always appreciate our everydayers. For your second listen of the day, you can head on over to Locked On Fantasy Hockey, where Flip and Steel break down everything that you need to know to build a sustainable and competitive fantasy roster. And if you're listening on YouTube, please do make sure to leave us a comment down below. Let me know what you thought about the episode here today. Which players from this range have impressed you the most? And which players are the standouts in the final range for this mini-series between 21st and 32nd overall? I would love to hear from you down below. But that wraps things up here for us today. I'm your host, Sebastian High. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope that you tune again very, very soon.